So if Season 3 is the first sequel season of The Simpsons, we should probably evaluate which of these follow-ups were the most successful. Season 3 contains 24 episodes total, so I cut that list in half to get our semi-finalists, and then callously broke 2 episodes' hearts by eliminating them before the live show. Don't worry about them, they don't have feelings, I'm pretty sure. This is my top 10 Simpsons episodes from Season 3. Lisa's Pony is a nice little Homer atonement story featuring some of the classiest references of the season. I mean, the thing opens with a 2001 A Space Odyssey homage. That kinda speaks for itself. Then it tacks on The Godfather and a beautiful Little Nemo sequence. It's safe to say that its reference game is off the charts. It does a great job showing off the personal sacrifices that loved ones make for each other, how people's actions speak louder than their words. It presents a very dopey and likable version of Homer, as he tries to pay for this thing. It gives Lisa the opportunity to prove how much she appreciates Homer's sacrifices. We even get our very first extended look at the Quickie Mart and see what a day in the life of Apu actually looks like. I admit though, I've always found the actual pony part of Lisa's Pony pretty dull. Yardley Smith does sell the sadness of this moment, but we don't get a ton of FaceTime with Princess. We don't really get attached as an audience. Of course, maybe I'm just bitter because every horse I've ever ridden hated my guts. But anyway, the pony stuff is more symbolic than anything. I wish that Homer and Lisa got more screen time together in general, didn't have to recycle a Season 2 scene as a relationship checkpoint. But as a general plot device, the pony works well at conveying how much Homer and Lisa actually care for each other, and that's the important thing. Sure, maybe I'm rating Lisa's Pony too low at number 10 in this countdown, but I can assure you of one thing. It's the number 1 Simpsons horse episode by a country mile. If you saw my Simpsons Showdown video, you probably saw this pick coming. It was basically the lock of the week. There's a temptation to just think about Lisa the Greek as that football episode, where one's enjoyment is dependent on how much you like the sport. And while sure, there's definitely a lot of topical humor here, I think this episode is special in its look at the Homer and Lisa dynamic, the way they interact on a personal level. That is not your typical Homer does her wrong, then makes up for it kind of story. We instead get a lot of the good times up front. We see how much Lisa enjoys being with her father, how they do find common interest here. It's charming how good Lisa is at picking the winners, how she enjoys this little secret that they have. As a result, Homer's betrayal hits us slightly harder in comparison to other episodes. That transition from the clever, devious Lisa into the ethical, melancholy version is very well earned. I still find the ending wager pretty gimmicky, that Lisa lays out the emotional rules so clearly. It works thematically with the sports betting, I just wish they found a better way for Homer to prove himself. That being said, Lisa the Greek features one of the most complete Homer-Lisa relationship stories ever, and does finish with a very heartwarming moment. Bart the Murderer is awesome in how well it integrates a fun look at the Mafia into the context of Springfield Elementary and the series as a whole. I don't think this episode would be as good if Bart just randomly fell into this legitimate businessman's social club with no story setup. They bookend the plot with Principal Skinner stuff, establishing the repetitive task thing early, then revisiting it for a callback. We even get a bit of that mob mentality among the children. The whole Mafia thing is portrayed so bloodlessly that it comes off more fun than dark. Considering the story centers around a child, they were smart to keep things light and quarantine any unpleasantness into the background. Joe Mantegna is fantastic right here. Not surprising at all they kept bringing Fat Tony back. Also, this is the big coming out episode for Chief Wiggum. We get a lot of amusing interplay between he and Fat Tony. We witness his cluelessness at the press conference. We laugh at his questionable investigation skills. Really? Willie Nelson? Homer and Marge barely have anything to do, but they make the most out of their limited screen time. Like every single one of their jokes work. The only thing that holds it back for me is its ending. I get the parody here, and as I mentioned earlier, this callback is appreciated. It's just not as funny as I wish, nor super satisfying as an explanation. On the plus side, its usage of MacGyver does make for a nice transition for this video. So thanks, Bart the Murderer. Maybe crime does pay after all. I'll be upfront here. I don't really watch Black Widower for its jokes. I'm not saying there isn't great stuff in here. Obviously, Kelsey Grammer is going to bring the funny no matter what, especially factoring in the character acting. However, this is one of the rare Simpsons episodes that gets carried primarily by its style, structure, and atmosphere. The animation is absolutely gorgeous, one of the most beautiful Simpsons episodes ever. So much shadow work, so much expressive character detail, fantastical coloring with its fantasy sequences, visual distortion stuff, and first-person VHS recordings. There is a richness in its visual approach we don't always see in network television. The same could be said for its plot, very intricately constructed to drop little clues throughout. They're paced extraordinarily well, making them more and more specific as we go along. This does contribute to it being a little less funny sometimes, having to put in that extra work to establish Selma's MacGyver habits, but I think it's worth it in the end. It builds to an extremely tense and suspenseful climax, with a captivating recap from Bart. It is a pretty strange setup looking back on it. Sideshow Bob's not exactly seeking direct revenge trying to kill Bart here, and it isn't crystal clear when or why he decided to murder Selma. Did he just always know she had money, or what? I guess he must have known before this point. Whatever the case is, Black Widower serves as a nice little transitional point for the Sideshow Bob saga, setting us up for years to come. Flaming Moe's contains one of the most fun and entertaining conflicts in the history of The Simpsons. Sure, the show has had its good rivalries, good points of contention, but there's a real party atmosphere to Flaming Moe's that separates it from the pack. The idea of Homer railing against this runaway fun machine, trying to get his due. It's a strong dynamic that keeps this thing rolling in Acts 2 and 3. They make good use out of their external references, like all the Cheers stuff with the witty repartee between Moe and Colette. Aerosmith's jokes are only okay, I guess, but just infusing a big musical moment really livens up the story. It creates nice contrast with all the struggles that Homer has to go through. Amazing how he seemed to find the one worse bar than Moe's. They definitely play up Homer's stupidity in this one, how prone he is to make mistakes at basically every moment. It's a real comedy of errors. I think it keeps Flaming Moe's from coming off as too oppressive or mean-spirited. This isn't The Social Network. It's more of a case of one guy being overly foolish and one guy being overly devious. Okay, maybe it is The Social Network. But it's a version where the two dudes can enjoy a drink together when it's all said and done. The focus is always on the fun, and that's what keeps me coming back to Flaming Moe's. I think what's great about Bart the Lover is how multi-dimensional it is with its point of view. That we get our very comfortable perspective from Bart as he goes through his usual sort of prank. You know, the whole prank followed by regret sort of arc. But they devote so much of the perspective to Mrs. Krabappel, showing off how lonely she is, how she feels disappointed by the hand dealt to her. Also, I suppose it's worth mentioning we get the pure comedy perspective too, thanks to the B-plot. But anyway, we very rarely get a sense of the collateral damage on The Simpsons episodes. We don't usually think about the bad day Mrs. Krabappel is having to deal with this junk constantly. We just go on to the next scene. Bart the Lover feels much more mature by comparison, allowing the audience these many moments of fun, but making us pay the invoice emotionally with Bart. They do a great job making us root for Edna. And when Bart figures out how badly he screwed up, rooting for Bart to set things right. It serves as a nice follow-up to Bart Gets an F, adding an extra layer to this dynamic. I do think the writing sequence gets a little too schmaltzy, even for me, but that's more of a minor quibble. When your main criticism is that an episode is ultimately too sweet, they're probably doing something right. Alright, let's just copy and paste what I said about the last one, except for Krusty this time. Seriously though, I absolutely love the rawness of Like Father Like Clown. How much this shattered relationship weighs so much on these two. How Krusty goes completely to pieces just thinking about it. How the subject hits a raw nerve for his father. Even with other character stuff, like how disappointed Bart is by the cancellation, or how there's this backstory with Miss Pennycandy we never really get to see. Like Father Like Clown takes its relationships extremely seriously, carefully considering its individual character interactions. It manages to avoid becoming too heavy or academic, especially in the second half, by briskly moving us from scene to scene. The first half is pretty sedentary, lots of extended scenes and flashbacks. The second half bounces back and forth between the kids and the rabbi, keeps moving us from one setup to the next. The whole third act basically hinges on a philosophical argument, and the writers somehow got away with it. I will say that the Sammy Davis Jr. quote has always felt like a bit of a cheat. I get the logic, but it's never struck me as a magical or definitive enough quote to convince a long-term stubborn person like the rabbi. But then again, the writers were kind of backed into a corner. Honestly, some of this episode's appeal is just the fact that I don't know a ton about Judaism. I've been to a bar mitzvah, and that's about it. I love getting a look at a world I am mostly unfamiliar with, seeing what challenges Krusty faced as a boy. Sure, some of this is thanks to the parody they're doing, but like Father Like Clown makes me really care about Krusty as a character. Which is honestly, sometimes a hard thing to do. Radio Bart is the best plotted episode of the season. It builds in such a satisfying way. We get that personal angle up front, a quick little examination of the Simpson family dynamic, then little tiny one-off pranks and stuff, and finally, the whole town takes over. Season 3 doesn't really go for these big Springfield stories, so this is a refreshing change of pace. There isn't actually a ton going on plot-wise in the second half, really. It's just, uh-oh, Timmy's in the well, then, actually Bart's in the well. Lots of sitting around, you know? They're free to go for the full satire of this kind of situation, kick it over to various incompetent people for quick jokes. Show off how dodgy the entertainment business can be, really merchandise this thing up. This has the danger of feeling aimless, or that they're just killing time, but the focus on a central problem keeps it together. All that periphery stuff circles around that well. Even as the story gets bigger and bigger, they manage to sneak in a legitimately emotional Bart speech toward the end. And you gotta give it credit. That callback to the label maker is amazing. It's so slick how they introduce both the impetus for the prank as well as its downfall in the same story point. That's great writing. Now, I wouldn't really say this episode has the biggest laughs ever, or has that really big emotional moment that sticks with you. Radio Bart is that extremely solid, consistently funny episode that inevitably ends up in the number 3 to number 5 slot on my list. That's still really good though, come on. Besides, we all know it should have won the Emmy that year instead of Claymation Easter. That's the real injustice. This might be the biggest shocker of the list, especially all the way at number 2. Because yeah, I get it. It's just your typical childhood romance story, and who really cares about Milhouse getting a girlfriend? Nobody cares about this episode. Bart's friend falls in love reminds me a lot of Last Exit to Springfield, and that the plot is mostly bare bones and unremarkable, but they gild the lily so frickin' much it becomes this amazing fever dream of jokes. I mean, this is the episode with 2 of the greatest sequences in the history of the series. That opening Raiders parody, just beautifully storyboarded and put together, but also the entire Fuzzy Bunny segment, which absolutely kills all the way through. It is just so deeply wrong on so many levels. Why did the film producers depict cartoon rabbits having sex? How many times has Mrs. Krabappel watched this thing? Was Fluffy Bunny really faking it? There are so many questions. It features a very funny B-plot that also gets oddly pornographic, with that rich, creamery butter. And of course, the gourmand metamorphizing into the voluptuary. Then we get stuff like the random old-timey operator, Martin playing the lute for no apparent reason, Samantha's father and his big dramatic "No!" It's this satisfying combination of being overly melodramatic with its romance and being overly random and absurd with its jokes. Sure, French-Canadian nuns, why not end with that? It features some smart little technical moments too, like the Magic 8-Ball callback and this cool shadow moment. And who could hate the episode that introduced Kirk Van Houten? Now, I don't think this is the most consistent episode ever. You won't watch it for its deep characterization or emotional moments, but sometimes all those little moments add up to a lot. Maybe I'm just a total sucker for a good Bart and Milhouse feud, but in my book, Bart's friend falls in love is one of the hidden gems of the series. Homer at the Bat is the funniest episode in the history of The Simpsons. Not 100% on this, but even if it's not, it's really, really up there. Top 3 for sure. And this is coming from someone who doesn't even care about baseball. I couldn't tell you a darn thing about Wade Boggs. Or Pitt the Elder, for that matter. The whole story is this beautiful trap set by the writers, giving us this nice standard little Homer plot, a straightforward sports story about a ragtag team of employees. And then boom, they drop like 9 nuclear bombs in Act 2, destroying any notion of a character arc, plot structure, or just sanity in general. Wonderbat? What Wonderbat? We have celebrities now. There's like barely anything happening in the plot for the second 2 acts. It's just, let's chill out and write the most amazing jokes for these athletes we can think of. They're blank enough slates that we can do whatever we want, as long as it's funny. Don Mattingly is, by far, my favorite, between him eagerly washing dishes and those distracting sideburns. Mr. Burns absolutely crushes this episode. I can't think of a single Burns joke that doesn't work. It's such an assertively delusional portrayal, how completely and utterly confident he is in his stupidity. Now, we get this attitude a lot in the workplace, all his old-timey references. Putting this stuff through the filter of softball suits him very well, adds that extra layer of hilarity to it. I also love how brazen the writers are at tempting fate in Act 3, how much they're willing to beat us over the head with what's about to happen. And I laugh anyway, despite knowing it's coming. The stakes are low enough, and pointless enough, that none of the misfortunes ruin the tone of the story. It's like the fun version of Homer's Enemy. Frank Grimes wishes he got an ending credits song as amazing as this one. This was one of those countdowns where the number 1 spot was never ever in doubt for me. Milhouse never really had a chance of winning this thing. Sorry, buddy. Also, to round things out, Treehouse of Horror 2 landed at number 12, and then Burns for Coffin der Kraftwerk unfortunately ended up as the bubble episode. Naturally, this is all one random person's opinion on YouTube, so I'd love to hear where you would rank the Season 3 episodes. Which ones are underappreciated? Which ones get too much love? It's fun hearing how different people perceive all of these, how certain episodes jump out to people more than others. I don't personally care that much for The Auto Show or Dog of Death, but I've heard from people who absolutely love these two. Lists are fun like that, let me know in the comments. Next up will be the wacky world of Season 4, featuring giant snowplows, out-of-control monorails, and most importantly, the defamation of New Orleans. Should be a good time. As always, thanks for watching.